So what are some major differences you see between you growing up as a black queer man and people from my generation?
I mean, there are similarities and there are differences, right? So the things that are different is when I was growing up, we didn't have all of the new technologies to help us develop community in the ways that you have now, right? So I grew up, the way that I met people, like dates, was through the phone chat line.
Wow.
You know what I mean? This is old school. Y'all don't even talk on
I
the phone
don't
now,
even know
right?
what that is.
So like, what it means is that like I had to go to the phone chat line, and I was using, you're not necessarily seeing the face of people you're meeting. You're taking a chance and taking a bus in some cases to go and visit somebody you don't know. A lot of our community was in person. So like I hung out on the streets, like 13th Street in Philly was very different than the neighborhood that you see now. Like it wasn't just a place that you go out. It was actually where community was fostered. So you met people legitimately, like literally on the street. The same thing in Christopher Street in New York. I went out there like as a 19-year-old college student and would go out and hang out on the streets until the sun came out on a pier. And you go home having made friends. That's different than being like in an Instagram generation where so much of your community is fostered through like one-dimensional social media spaces. We also had places to go. Like I went to clubs and would be at the clubs until the sun came out, you know what I mean? And then after the club is out, you hanging out on the street and then you go into the diner, and before you know it, you don't have this whole network of friends. Now, that allowed, I'm not making a claim that one is better or worse. I think that there are differences. So I often ask now, what does the community of people have? Like, I felt in so many ways what we lack in technology, we had in terms of bona fide, and I hate to say this because I sound so old and that generational shit that we do, but like, I remember being with strangers, people I did not know on street corners. Like, like the sex workers, the trans girls like out there, and like not ever knowing them, but just looking at them and wanting to know who they were, and then ended up in their homes, like into the wee hours of the morning, getting to know them, like boundary crossing. And none of this shit was always, it wasn't so necessarily built on the need to have a perfect avatar, like the need to have a perfect Instagram page. Like, I don't know, it's just, so that's the difference. I miss the days of like having options as a black queer person in both Philly, and I would, back in the day, like we would travel from New York to Philly, to Baltimore, to DC, sometimes in like a U-Haul truck. You don't know nothing about that. Like this is what it was. Like we would travel to these places, and like I have friends all the way up and down like the Eastern Seaboard, like people that I just meet on a whim. And I miss that. Now when I go out and I'm walking on Christopher Street, I'm walking on 13th Street, places I've been as teens, and I see what I see. For all of what seems to be the veneer of progressive economic display, businesses lacking in culture. The very reasons that these neighborhoods are what they are is because of the black queer cultures, the black trans cultures that made them what they were, that made them cool, that brought people there, the white gays wanting to come in and model what we were doing, buy the shit out, get their private businesses, get their security guards, keep the black people and brown folk off the fucking streets, is precisely what gave those places heart. The heart is gone.
So in your book, I read that you talk about trauma, and there's a moment where you talk about getting doused in gasoline and almost lit on fire. Do you think that trauma and trauma in general is a part of the queer experience?
For sure. I think that...
And in what ways can we just
yeah,
build from trauma and become like better people?
And I want to be specific. Yeah. I think, there's queer broadly, but I mean, as black queer folk, I mean, we're not just we're not dealing with the traumas that come from like antagonism because we're queer or trans or gender nonconforming or whatever. Like racism is a thing, poverty is a thing. I don't see those as any less potent as like somebody saying something like calling us a faggot or some shit like that. That said, yes, loneliness is a common, I think, experience that so many of us endure, right? Like, loneliness is a traumatic thing. And what I mean by loneliness, like the ability to move through the world knowing and being locked up, like, that's like, you're locked up inside yourself, never really able to sort of like be who you are, never really able to say like, oh my God, I'm in 3rd grade, but I had a crush on my teacher. You can't go home and say that shit, so you're lonely. you don't really have access and connection to like the type of people in the ways that other people do. That's pervasive, that's systemic. I think a lot of us suffer that, especially men. Like we suffer, I think this is the case too for a lot of black men. Like this, I often ask, how can you ask for the thing that you've been denied? Like how the fuck do you ask for love when it's been denied you so long? So you try to bring two black gay men, queer men, bi men into a room together, and you like love each other. And you loving each other through racism, the shit that you bring, the baggage that you carry, the fact that you think that men are not supposed to fucking be soft and give love or cry because you've been socialized to believe you're supposed to be hard, and your shit against femme people, femphobia, like all this shit that we bring, that is the traces of trauma, right? Like, so in order to love ourselves out of that, we have to, one, acknowledge that we've been shaped by it, but never ever is it so strong that it can determine who we are. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like Baldwin was asked, like, how do you, by a white reporter, of course, like, what do you feel like the fact that you're like black and gay? He's like, I'm good. Like the turn is like to look at our lives, to look at black queerness and go, no, this shit is great. This is, I call it magic. It's precisely because of my experience as a black queer person growing up in this context that I am who I am. I would never take that away. So it's turning the trauma on its head and figuring out how we can move through that shit.
I think that young people know what it actually takes to create the revolution. Like we always are talking about, we need something to happen, but do you think we know exactly the steps that need to happen for actual change?
Sure, and maybe it isn't just young people, maybe it is many of us within this context, like in this present historical moment that we're in. We have so many comforts, and I'm speaking relatively here. So, you know, when people talk about revolution, I'm like, do you know what that takes? You know what I mean? You have people like Angela Davis, who is still with us, right? Like, who spent time in jail, like legit behind bars because she, you know what I mean? Like, she resisted and stood up against the state. Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was from Philadelphia, is a political prisoner who is locked up still today. We have people that were killed, people that suffered. So revolution, like, isn't a word that is meant to be cute. Revolution is this idea that one is willing to sacrifice and give up comfort and oftentimes give up safety and resources and a lot of the very things that a lot of us take comfort in for the sake of collective uplift. If we are about real revolution, I don't think many of us would sign up for that work, because it would mean that all of the good comforts that we have and all the shit that we are privy to would no longer we would no longer have access to that. To be part of revolution is to be disliked and not loved by the state, and that is never ever a fun thing. It means you'll be surveilled by law enforcement. It means sometimes that you won't be allowed access to jobs and you won't be allowed access to power. But there are ways that revolution is not one monolithic thing. There are ways that one can resist. That is not all about disruption or about like taking up arms or like laying out in front of a building. I think that there are ways that we can resist in our everyday lives too.
In what ways?
And that is like by using whatever platforms we have to help proliferate truth in a moment where, like, with America, we love to lie about ourselves, right? Like, so if you have access to platforms, whether that's social media or whatever, bring up and have real conversations about shit that matters in people's lives, something that matters about beyond the things that just touch you. It means that we can contribute to causes, that we can be part of causes, that we can use whatever our skills are, our gifts are, our time, our energies to commit towards a greater good. It means that when some shit is going on, like Me Too, or Time's Up, or Say Her Name, our Movement for Black Lives, our dreamers, that we don't be bystanders. Like, I don't use the term ally, right? Like, we are not called to be allies. Like, allies stand on the side, they watch it happen. I like to use the word like accomplices, like people who are willing, you know, like I grew up back in the day, like when people fighting, you jump the fuck in,
yeah, absolutely.
Even if you get your ass beat, that's an accomplice, right? So like, how many of us are willing to like jump in the fight and take an L? That's what it means, and those are the ways. Like being like revolution means like rejecting all of the things that tells us as Black people that we got to acquiesce to whiteness in order to be who we are, that we got to acquiesce as men to this idea of like masculinity and manhood that is all about power and dominance and control. Revolution means rejecting that shit. When you say I'm queer, you're actually committing an act of revolution in a society that tells you that queerness is to be denied, that you're going to hell for it. Like, I would rather go to hell for telling the truth than to go to heaven for telling a lie. That's revolution, right? Like, this is what I mean to like live this shit out every day. And those are things that you don't necessarily have to take the bullet for, although you might take bullets in different ways.